got good religion, I'm so glad. I got good religion, I'm so glad. I got good religion, my feet been pulled from the miry clay. I am better since I got good religion. I am stronger since I got good religion. I am purer since I got good religion. My feet been pulled from the miry clay. I'm so glad I got good religion. I'm so glad I got good religion. I'm so glad I got good religion. My feet been pulled from the miry clay. Oh, my feet been pulled. My feet been pulled from the miry clay.
All right, I'm reading to you from Luke chapter 7. Jesus went to a city called Nain, and his disciples were with him, along with a crowd of others, a large crowd. Now, as he was approaching the gate of the city, behold, they were met by a funeral procession. A dead man was being carried out. He was the only son of his mother, who was a widow. And there was also a sizable crowd from the city in the funeral procession. When the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her. He said, "Do not weep." And he came up and touched the body, and those who were carrying the litter stopped. And he said to them, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the man sat up, began to speak, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Fear gripped them all, and they began glorifying God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people." And this news concerning him spread out all over the surrounding area and through Judea. In 1900, the average life expectancy in America was 40. Yeah. Now, and I guess now it's well into the 70s. We have, in the last few years, there's been a real significant increase in the number of centenarians, people over 100. Very noticeable. And so, yay on doctors and stuff like that. And but in the ancient world, 40. It wouldn't have been much different than 1900. People. Now, it's not that in the ancient world you expected people to die. Like everyone just thought, well, you got 40 years and that's it. People knew that you were supposed to live into your 70s and 80s. It actually says in the book of Psalms, the number of years allotted to a person are 70 years, or if by reason of strength, 80. So the expectation was, but it was hard to get there. And so, because, infection, disease, you have an accident and there's no way to repair it, that was how it went. So when you got to be that old, Carl, is in his 80s. He's, 86 or something, right? Now, when you look at Carl, you don't think of Carl as old, right? But in those days, if you made it that long, you'd be like, whoa, old man John. You don't just, suddenly there's a whole other category here. Elder, look, hey, everybody, it's Elder John. Hey, Elder John, how you doing, right? And so, in fact, that's what they called the guy who was John, the beloved disciple, who ends up years later, writing the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. He was actually called Elder John, which kind of had a double meaning. On the one hand, it referred to a position of function in the church. On the other hand, it was really, he was old. Just so you know, he was probably a teenager when Jesus was crucified, so that's about the year 30. And now he probably wrote the Gospel of John somewhere around the year 90 in the book of Revelation, sometime in that last decade of the first century. So, it was good 60 to 70 years after Jesus died when he wrote the stuff, which is why the Gospel of John is this amazing, wonderful mix of eyewitness stuff, unique eyewitness detail, and meditation on who Christ is. It's just a fascinating and wonderful book as a result. So Elder John. So I'm telling you this because it's really not that unusual for a young man to die and for there to be a funeral. I mean, it's not like this is, oh my goodness, like with Sierra dying at age 16. That's incredibly rare nowadays. But in the ancient world, not so much. So Jesus sees this procession, a funeral procession going by, and he has compassion for the mother, but you have to understand this compassion, because when we read it from our modern world, we think Jesus feels sorry for her grief. For her grief. And he clearly has compassion for her grief. I mean, he says to her, "Do not weep." So he clearly has compassion for her grief. But it's really about something else. Luke makes that something else clear. It's just easy for us to miss because we don't know the code words. He says that the young man was her only son and she's a widow. Now, here's why that's important. The commandment, honor your father and your mother, means take care of your parents when they get old. That's what it means. See, we have in the Constitution, right, if you read the preamble to the Constitution, it says, in order to establish the greater good. And within the Constitution, there's this idea that we're in this together. And so the Constitution has things in it like impartial courts that everyone can get redress of their wrongs. And post office. Did you know the post office is in the Constitution? Did you know that? It is. Yep. Congress is supposed to establish the post office and make sure there's a post office. Ben Franklin was very big on that one. Yeah. And so so a post office, what does a post office mean? You think about this. If you put I almost said 21-cent stamp. I'm that old. I remember when that was a first-class stamp. You put a whatever, forever stamp. I don't know what they are now, 40-something. Are they 50 cents now? 47-cent stamp on a letter. You can address it to anywhere in the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, and it will go there, even if it's not convenient. Okay? Do you understand this? So the poorest person can get mail and can send mail. And the farthest flung person can get mail and can send mail. This is the idea of that kind of commonwealth for the common good. We're in this together sort of thing. And out of that way of thinking comes this social safety net that you're used to and that some of you actually are part of, like Medicare and Social Security. And yes, you paid for it, so of course you deserve it. I expect to get mine because I've been paying for years. I will be very upset if suddenly Congress goes, well, you know what? Don't get me going on Social Security. Everyone's like, Social Security system is broken. No, it's not. You guys borrowed money from it. You owe that money back. Start paying up. But that's another conversation, a little bit of history there for you. So anyway, but with social safety net, right? This idea that we have is completely foreign to the ancient world. In the ancient world, your social safety net was your children were supposed to take care of you. So then if you have no husband, if you're a woman with no husband and you have no children to take care of you, you are, and this is as simple as it is, you are destitute. That's it. Your life is basically over. You will end up impoverished and on the street in a very short period of time. And in fact, this is so much the case that the Bible uses the phrase widows and orphans as a way of sort of, it's like code for the poorest of the poor, the most destitute and helpless people there are, the widows and the orphans. So in the book of James, for example, in the first chapter, it says, "This is religion which is pure and undefiled in the sight of our God and Father, to visit blessing upon orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained from the world." And this is why the early church was so concerned about taking care of people in this situation, feeding them and taking care of them, so much so that in the middle of the 4th century, a little more history lesson, because, like I can stay on topic, right? Can you imagine me doing a sermon where I actually stayed on topic? It's kind of like there's a topic, and then I kind of wander back and forth between it. Anyway, in the 4th century, there was a emperor named Constantine. He became the first Christian emperor, and he declared that Christianity would be the official religion of the Roman Empire. After he was died, his successor was a guy named Julian, and Julian was not a Christian. Julian was a pagan. He actually wanted paganism to be restored, but the problem was Christianity was more organized and just better run. And so he really got on the priests and the leadership in the pagan temples. And one of the things he said to them, he says, we know that these Christians just do this in order to get more followers, but they take care not only of their own poor, but of ours as well. So when Jesus looks at this poor woman, it's not just the fact that she's sad and she's lost her son. He's also looking at the fact that her future is completely dismal. And so when he raises this young man from the dead, he saves them both. Do you understand how this works? But I think he goes beyond that. I actually think he saves the people of Nain, I think he saves the city as well from a judgment. Because the Bible, all over the Bible, says, do not turn your hand away from the poor. So, because here's what I think would happen. These people who are there are not there for her. They're here because for the man who died. They're honoring a guy who was an important guy in the community. So afterwards, she'd go through what little bit was left, and then she would start to, she'd have to go and, borrow money, beg for money from people. So, at first they would help out. The friends of her son, they would help out at first. Right, a little bit here, a little bit there. Maybe they give her some food. But after a while, what would happen. They'd see her coming. They say, turn down the TV, everyone be quiet, pretend we're not here. And so when that happens, then the community comes under judgment for its failure to fulfill the commandment. But that's human nature for you, because human nature is all about, I got mine, and you can't have it. So Jesus' action saves the man from death, the woman from abject poverty, the community from a judgment that they would almost certainly have brought on themselves. And it becomes part of the proclamation of the gospel, so that the news about him spreads out not only geographically, if you think of it spreading out across time, across space, it also spreads out across time, because here we are almost 2,000 years later, and we're talking about it. This action that Jesus did redounds to us. Okay, so this is a really important observation, that things have a way of rippling. They have a ripple effect. Every action has a ripple effect. The things we do impact people. Sometimes people we don't even know, and it just does that. And for good or ill, blessing or curse, it has that impact, and it just kind of echoes across time and ripples through space, right across the sea of humanity. This is incredible. I got to tell you how true this is. This is so in my job, sometimes I deal with folks who are in crisis as adults, and it traces back to a broken family system, and then you keep going and you find out that family system came from a broken family system, which came from a broken family system, where you literally can have layers and layers of this stuff. Dysfunctional family tends to produce children who tend to marry and create new dysfunctional families, and it just goes on from generation to generation. It just gets passed on like a legacy. Sometimes it's called a generational curse, and we see this all the time. But it's not just systems theory. It turns out there's also hard biology behind it. So this is really interesting. There's a field of biology now called epigenetics. Because, I can't stand topics. So let me tell you about epigenetics. Epigenetics is, you have your main DNA. That's 50% your mom, 50% your dad. One of the things that is interesting is not just what is your DNA, but what is the expression of your DNA. So the potential code, the DNA is the potential code, but now there's going to be some things that affect the expression, the protein expression within the DNA. And one of the main drivers of this is called the mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA comes entirely from your mom. It comes from her mom and your grandma and your great grandma. It's matrilineal, and it's absolutely straight line back. And the only changes in the mitochondrial DNA are the kinds of changes that come through mutations. And it turns out that one of the things that can happen is, let's say that just imagine this scenario. You have a husband and wife. They have a terrible, terrible relationship. It's abusive. It's violent. But they have like 3 kids in quick succession. So the oldest kid is just barely 3, and the youngest is just a couple weeks old. And mom and dad are at it again, and dad kills mom and then kills himself. Okay, imagine this terrible scenario. And the 3 children now are orphans, and they all get adopted out to different families. And the families they get adopted to are wonderful families. Okay, wonderful families. So they come out of these great families. And yet, because of what happened to mom, because of that violent relationship, her DNA can have changed so that her grandchildren, even if they were raised in wonderful homes, can be prone to depression, mental illness, anxiety, stuff like that. Isn't that amazing? Not in a good way, but isn't that amazing? The way the Bible talks about this deep truth. So I love this stuff because, this is stuff that is simply, this is how it operates. And we're discovering more and more all the time about how deeply true this is. But the Bible's been talking about this for thousands of years, that the sins of the parents are visited upon the children to the 5th generation. I mean, it's just that's not God being mean. That's an acknowledgement that that's how it works. It gets passed on from generation to generation. And of course, this has a really, terrible implication for us. It means that our lives are affecting us, our children, the people around us, for good and or ill. And judgment is about that very thing. We get judged. We live in a society that has this idea like, it's my life. I can do with it what I want. It doesn't matter what I do with my life. It's, nobody's business if I do. If I go to church on Sunday and party all night Monday, ain't nobody's business if I do. That's an old blues song. Yeah. Right? Ain't nobody's business if I do. Right? Well, it turns out it ain't nobody's business, but it does impact all kinds of people. It radiates outward through space, and it echoes down through time, and it has an impact. It makes a difference. So we get judged on all of that. When I think about this, when I try to explain it to people and help them understand, I find guns are very useful. I don't mean like I point a gun at you and then you suddenly are highly motivated to understand. I mean, you think about this. So let's say that I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to take a moral action, right? So my moral action goes a certain direction. In other words, the bullet tends to go where the gun is pointed, right? But not necessarily. So imagine a scenario where maybe there's somebody, who's packing because, the Second Amendment and all that kind of stuff. And the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, right? So then there's a bad guy with a gun. So the good guy with the gun pulls out their gun. But of course, now their adrenaline is shooting through the roof. Their heart rate has gone way high. And when you do that, you kind of lose control. So now they're like shaking all over and they start shooting and the bullets are flying everywhere and they don't actually hit anything except neighbors and people across the street. Okay? Do you understand? I mean, I know this to be true because it happened in my block when I was a kid. A guy tried to rob a guy who had this cash box from his gas station. And inside his cash box, he had a gun. He pulls the gun out. He was being robbed at gunpoint. He pulls it. They were shooting at each other from point-blank range. Bullets flying all over, including into the neighbors' houses. Right? Okay, so the robber, just so you know, the story had a happy ending. Yes, there was some broken glass, and neighbor across the street, there was a bullet in his chair where his head had been a few minutes before, but he had gone to bed, so he was okay. And the bad guy did catch one bullet through his butt cheek, which ricocheted off the wallet in his back pocket and came out his other butt cheek. So the cops had no problem finding him because he left a trail of blood, and he tried to hide in a car. So he found an unlocked car on the street, and he tried to hide in it. And so the cops just followed the blood, and they got him. So, but you understand, if a bullet goes flying and it kills someone across the street, I never intended for that to happen. I was trying to stop the bad guy with the gun. But you're still responsible. Do you understand that? You're still responsible. See, that's what this stuff is. I make a choice. I may have no intention to harm anyone else. You know, it's nobody's business but my own, but I do a thing and it has this impact and it ripples out and it affects people. And so when we're making moral choices, we got to make those kinds of moral choices based on that reality. Jesus raises this young man in order that he might fulfill the commandment. Judgment is on him whether he fulfills that commandment or not. The action Jesus takes knowing it's going to have that ripple effect. Raising him helps her. That helps the community. That also spreads the word. I mean, it just kind of works its way through like this. The rabbis, remember the movie Schindler's List? Did you see that? Okay. In the end of Schindler's List, there's a reference to it, teaching from the rabbis. Now, this particular saying is found 3 times in what's called the Talmud, which is a large collection of rabbinic teaching. In the different places it occurs, it's a little teeny bit different each time. One time it just refers only to Israelites, but the other 2 times it's sort of generic. And it's the generic version you hear at the end of the movie. It goes like this: the one who saves a single life saves the world entire. And when the rabbis said that, they were actually talking about this stuff. Because every life redounds. Every life produces blessings that just kind of keep going and going and going. And when you save somebody's life, you save all kinds of things. You save their family. You save the children maybe they're going to have but haven't had yet. You save their friends. It's like you save the entire world because the implication of every life is so deep and so broad. And what this does for us as Christians is it's kind of scary if you really stop and think about this. Because Jesus is asking us to think that way. He's asking us to look that way, to see things that way, to look at our choices that way, to stop having that selfish view like it doesn't matter what I do as long as it only affects me, but begin to see it in terms of its greater implication and then to act accordingly. And that's tough. It's tough to follow Jesus. It's tough to be his disciple. Especially when you think about it, that the actions we take make such a difference. But they do. And that's the calling we have. Can you find the prayer of response now? And let's pray that together. The rabbis taught that who saves one life saves the world entire. And so it is. Every action and every blessing received or given flows outward to affect others, even others not yet conceived. So my choices, my actions are not about me alone. Everything that I do ripples across the ocean of humanity for good or ill. So grant me the larger view, Lord Jesus. Help me make choices with a view towards a larger benefit, a greater good, a fuller blessing. In your name, amen.